on Mastering the Art of Selling Yourself in the Law Enforcement Profession. Today's session is part 2 of our 2-part webinar series on leadership development. Today's instructors are from Mesa, Arizona Police Department. You'll be hearing from Deanna Cantrell, the Assistant Chief of the Administrative Services Bureau, and David Hagar, the Commander of the Technical Services Division. Before we begin, I want to share with you some of the information about the Justice Clearinghouse, one of the key reasons why we're all here today. The Justice Clearinghouse is a peer-to-peer educational program for justice professionals launched 1 year ago. We'd like to think of the Justice Clearinghouse as a year-round virtual conference in which our audience and members receive timely and relevant information from the field on justice-related topics. While our events are free to attend, our members receive 24/7 access to our entire video library, and they're eligible to receive certificates of attendance that may be used when seeking continued education credits. So if you're not a present member of the Clearinghouse, I would like to invite you to join today and support our work. And finally, before I turn it over to our esteemed panelists today, I just want to address some basic housekeeping items with everyone. First, this event is being recorded, and it's scheduled to last between 45 and 60 minutes. The webinar will be available on the Justice Clearinghouse website for later viewing. Second, although this is a listen-only event, all attendees have the opportunity to type in any questions using the webinar toolbox, and we'll address as many questions as possible at the conclusion of today's session. If for some reason we don't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us or reach out to our instructors today, and I'm sure they'd be happy to have an offline conversation with you. And finally, after today's webinar, we will send you a follow-up survey, and we ask that you take a few moments to complete it, as your feedback will help us shape our future schedule of events. So thank you again for attending. That's all I have in terms of introductions, and I'd like to turn it over to our panelists today to get started.
Thank you, Heather, and good morning, and thank you all for joining us again. There were a few questions we didn't get to yesterday. One of those was why did Deanna talk about gender and not Dave talk about it? And I guess part of that, it's a good question and a fair question. You know, and I guess I could say I probably wouldn't talk about how to shave a beard because I don't have a beard. You know, so that might, I mean, that's kind of part of it, is that gender affects me a lot more than it does affect Dave, gender differences and gender bias. But also, I was the chair, and now I'm an advisor of the Arizona Women's Initiative Network, and part of what we're doing in Arizona is trying to raise the number of women in law enforcement. And so, of course, that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and so that's the reason that I discuss it and Dave doesn't. But the other question was, what are Mesa's stats and I'm guessing as far as gender goes. And Mesa, we're authorized for 800, a little over 800 sworn, but we currently have filled right around 760, somewhere around there, and we have about 84 sworn women. We have a lot more civilian women, but we have about 84 sworn. So we're right around 11% nationally. Women are about 10 to 12%, and so we're right in that number, but of course it is something that we're working on. So I just wanted to address that one. And then there was another question that Dave will answer about who do we look up to as mentors and why? Like, how did we pick our mentors?
And I'll answer that. There's actually a couple, probably 3 mentors that I've used throughout my career. And it's people that I look to that had some similar personal beliefs and the way they handled their life, their career, and their personal decisions. But it was also people that I could go to and they weren't afraid to give me the straight answer. And I've always told people, a friend is somebody who tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And all of these people know that they have full rights to tell me whatever. One is actually a lieutenant in our department who I've known since I was a teenager, an assistant chief in our department, and then there's a chief in another department up in the Northwest. And these are people that I can call and ask any type of question, and I know that I'm going to get some good answers from. So you find those people. I don't hop around. These are people that I've known for, any of them have been at least 15 years. Some of them are in the 30-year range. So it's people that are pretty set. So I know that yesterday we talked much more on the macro level about the process and where we're going when we talk about interviewing. But we're really going to get today into some of the very small points and research and preparation. And we're going to sound like we have a little bit of OCD when we go through this, but each of us have a notebook that we've created, Chief Cantrell and I. It's a 2-inch 3-ring binder full of paperwork on things that we've gotten. So start off with your internet searches. The internet has timely information. It's out there. You may be able to get information on a recent test for a similar position in another agency or agencies nearby, and get all that different information there. PERF, IACP, National Institute of Justice, they all have people that are writing documents for them. Even the clearinghouse here has the information that's out there. Grab that information because you never know where it's going to help out. Create your own network. Send emails out to each other in your own little network of, hey, I just saw this document or I saw this article online. This may be useful to you. And I have a file where I put all those. It may not be useful to me now, but I can go back and research those. Any materials from the announcement, they put information in the announcement for a specific reason. That's what they're looking for. The best candidate will be someone who has a 2-year degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's in this field, wherever it is. Those announcements are what you want to gear yourself toward. Think of that announcement as a questionnaire. The statements may be ending just sentences, but you're trying to answer each one of those sentences with, yes, I have that, I have this background, I have this experience. Your own agency, your own city, municipality, county, wherever you work, you have your own websites. And if it's important enough to your agency or your municipality to put on their website, it should be important enough for you to at least be aware of and know where that resource is to get information from. We all have the basic management policies, our personnel rules, any of your specific policy. We list ARS up here, Arizona Revised Statute. But whatever law that comes from your state, those are things that are out there and set. Do you need to know how long of a rifle has to be legal? Probably not if you're looking to be a lieutenant somewhere, but if you're working on a type of gun squad, maybe that's something you do need to look at. The last point on here, and this is huge, is personal interviews. Past, present leaders, people that are in your group, maybe from another agency, go out and ask them, what would they want to see in an interview process? What do they want to see from a panel interview? What questions have they had in the past? And I'll tell you, that's one of the best places where I've gotten a lot of my research is when somebody, I have a friend from an agency just to the south of us, he just tested for a commander position, and as soon as he was done, I called him up and I said, what was every question that was asked of you? And we wrote them down because I tell you what, that's going to be a question that's going to ask in another agency. They don't change very often. Some of the words may change, the order may change, but the heart of what they're getting at is the same. So these are some of the reference places where you're going to get your questions from.
So, and let me just tell you, I have one of my books sitting here with a bunch of research in it, and I'll tell you just right off the top, the first 3 documents. One's emerging use of force issues, and that's an IACP document. One is accelerating economic growth and vitality through smarter public safety management. That is an NIJ document. And then from PERF, I have a statement on behalf of police executives on principles for building trust and collaboration. So, and these are things that I printed out in just the last year that I've read because of things that are going on throughout the country. So, you know, make yourself a book or something of these kinds of important documents that you're going to want to read before you take a testing process.
So once you have all this, next thing you want to do is create your own set of questions. And this slide's going to get pretty lengthy. And again, it comes back to a little bit of the OCD. But I think we have 15, 17 different points up here. And each one of these you want to answer from 3 different positions. And we discussed this a little bit yesterday. But say for leadership, you want to answer, if the question is, what is your leadership philosophy? Well, obviously you're going to answer that from a philosophical standpoint. Why do you believe what you believe? You want to give them an example of actually how you use that leadership style to move forward and to lead an organization, and then future how you would do that. So you're coming up with various questions. What's your leadership style? What do you see in a good leader? Communication. What's your communication style? Tell us about a time that you've used communication to fix a problem. Tell us about a time that you recognized poor communication skills within an area that took away from what their mission was. Again, not going to go through every point, but these are things that you need to come up with as many questions as possible. In the book here, we have about, there's 4 pages with just 75 questions that we've gotten from people from different tests throughout the country and that we've talked to. Again, it may not be the exact question that you're looking at, but it is a resource on how you get there. towards the bottom you see we have 30, 60, 90. You may be asked, if you were given this division or if you get this assignment, what would your plans be for 30, 60, and 90 days out? And so you have to look at where you're going to come from and come up with a plan for the future, because they want to see how are you going to grasp this new assignment, how are you going to analyze the effectiveness or meeting the mission, and then what are your plans for the future? And that's a very involved question. You really need to be thinking about what is the culture. Is it something where you need to come in and clean house and maybe get new people in? Do you actually want to say, you know what, I haven't worked in that area for a while, so in the first 30 days I'm going to take the time to understand what they do, understand the personalities and the fit for the group, understand the productivity and the resources. Over the next 60 days, I'm going to bring the other supervisors, subordinate supervisors, and the team in to find out what they believe that we can do to enhance the process and guide that. And in 90 days, I'm going to set goals to where we're going. So you have to think through everything that you're trying to do.
Yeah, so let me read a few questions for you because this is just, like David and I said, you know, I have a book here that has probably 75 questions or so in it, but they really do, you can lump them into categories, and most of them are the categories that you see on your screen. And so, and then in answering them, I would always try to answer them in those three ways. First, philosophically, how do I feel about it? Second, what have I actually done? You know, future behavior is based on past behavior, and then how would I handle it in the future? So here's some questions. I'll read you the first 5 or 6. Why do you want to be the sergeant, the captain, the commander, the whatever it is? Why do you want to be the blank in this particular area? Make sure you have an answer for that, you know, a good, intelligent answer. Please summarize your work experience and highlight elements of your career that you believe are especially relevant to this position. This is a verbal resume, and we're going to go over how to answer to a verbal resume. I'll give you a C example, and then I'll give you an A+ example of how to answer that question. What are the most significant budgetary challenges facing this agency? What is your experience in making presentations to community groups? So those are just an example of some of the types of questions. So take these and make questions out of each of those different topics. So next we're going to talk about preparing for your interview. So the beginning is get the announcement, see what it says, figure out what you're going to be tested on, see who's on the panel, do all of your research, start putting all your research in a book and start reading it. And then, so that's the beginning of your preparation. Next, before you walk in the room, you need to know some things. You need to picture that going well. You need to picture yourself walking in that interview and doing it successfully. And if that means setting yourself up and doing a mock interview, which I did when I tested for commander, I had friends that I put together and I did a mock panel for myself, and it was really the best thing I'd ever done to really watch myself on video and see the things that I did wrong. Know your qualifications, and I don't mean just know what your resume says. You need to have examples. Have an example of why your leadership has been successful, an example of why your communication skills, an example of how you've held people accountable, an example of how you've made morale better. You need to make sure, because you can't come up with it when you walk in the room. If you don't have that example already in your mind, you're going to struggle to try to find something when you're put under pressure and you're asked that question if you didn't think of it before you walked in. So know what qualifies you for the position. Know why you want it. Identify what makes you nervous. If you do get nervous, most of the time when people walk into interviews and they're nervous, their pitch goes up, and typically most folks don't like people with a high-pitched voice. A low-pitched voice is much more soothing and it's much more relaxing. And so you want to be careful of that. If your pitch does go up, try to be careful of that and you know, do what you can. And then the other thing is your rate of speech will increase, of course, when you're nervous. It's okay to have your rate of speech increase if you're a slow talker to begin with. That would be fantastic, because you do not want to be a slow talker. That turns people off in assessment centers. You want to have a moderate rate of speech. So know what makes you nervous and then try to combat that. The best way to combat it is to be prepared, because the more prepared you are, the better off you'll be. And so take a deep breath. Combat breathing is certainly good. Before I walk in the room, I'll take a few very good deep breaths and hold them in. for 6 or 7 seconds and then let them out, because it's going to slow my heart rate down just a little and get me into the room and hopefully get me started without being too nervous. All right, study techniques. So this is how I study, and it has worked for me many times in the past. I first take all of those points, so discipline, accountability, communication, interpersonal skills. I take those things and I write out questions. And then for each of those questions in this book that I have that has 60 or 70 questions in it, I have written out answers for all of those. Some of them are a page typed, some of them are a paragraph typed. But I've written out answers for each one of those topics, for each one of those questions. And then I take that paragraph and I bullet it down into 4 or 5 bullets that I can remember, or an acronym or whatever, that will help me remember. So if I'm asked a question on leadership, regardless of how it's asked, whether it's my philosophy, my style, how it's worked in the past, what am I going to do in the future, whatever it is, I know generally what my thoughts are on leadership. And so I could answer just about any question that's thrown at me on that particular topic. And then I study, I repeat. I record myself. I listen to the recording on the way to and from work. I have about a 15-minute drive. And so I listen to my answers to different questions. I hear how I sound. I hear if I'm saying too much, or if I have some annoying verbal things that I'm doing, and then read it, write it, say it. That works for me. So I put it on paper, I say it out loud, I record myself, I listen to myself. All good study techniques.
And what's going to help you with this is this isn't going to sound robotic. This is going to become natural and organic in the way you do business. Don't think that this is something you want to start 2 weeks before the test. This is something that starts months before. You know in your organization, generally speaking, what the attrition rates are and where people may be moving around. Start making your notebook now for the future and start typing out these answers. These questions aren't going to change. They're not going to come up with a question in 2016 that we've never heard of. And you want to sound genuine, that people think, wow, that is really thought through, and not that you're struggling to remember what you tried to memorize last week. So that repetition puts it into your brain for the future.
So this is a method of answering the question if you kind of get stuck. So if you get asked a question and you answer it, and you see that maybe the board is looking at you and being like, hey, and you know that they're maybe wanting some more information from you, but that's really the best answer you have, you could say something like, given my level of training and experience right now, that's how I'd handle this. However, I'm certain that after I get in that position and have more training and more experience, I may handle it differently. But for now, given my level of experience, this is what I would do. I think this is the appropriate route, whatever, however you want to say that. But you could always leave yourself 2 ways to go. The second one is, I can see 2 ways to handle this, and there's many ways. There are many ways to skin a cat. Unless it's a definitive black and white policy and there is truly only one way that you can answer that, then you certainly don't want to say, I can see 2 or 3 different ways to go on this. But typically there are a lot of ways that you can handle things. So you may say that I can see a couple of different ways, and given my experience, this is how I would handle it. And so, so you pick a way that you're going to go. The third thing there is tactical and personnel issues. Sometimes if you're, depending on what kind of board you're in, you may have a question that, maybe you end up with a barricaded subject or something like that. And it could go different ways. If the subject comes out, I will do this. If the subject remains barricaded, I will continue to, I'll have a perimeter set up, I will continue to do negotiations, I will continue to gather intelligence, I will continue to do these things. So you may have 2 different ways that it could go. Just make sure in your mind you're seeing all of the different avenues that different scenarios could go.
Policy in law enforcement is really what dictates everything that we do. And if someone were to get in trouble or someone were to do a good job, it's probably because they followed policy. So knowing your policy is really important. The other thing you have to understand is that there may be more than one policy that falls into something. For example, the first scenario, maybe you're a supervisor and you have a carjacking, a pursuit, and a barricade. You obviously have to know your pursuit policy. Code 3 driving in Mesa, we have what's called a bullseye. If you're not on a call or if you're on a lower level call, you go out to look for the vehicle. Use of force, search and seizure, pursuits, barricades. You're not going to quote the policy, but it's going to show that you have the knowledge of it, because especially for supervisory positions, you need to have a general knowledge of all of your policy. You probably don't have to know specifics about towing a vehicle and the boxes to check on a form, but you need to know when you can do it. You need to know what needs to be filled out after an officer uses use of force, a taser, something of that. Or if you're working in the records department and somebody comes in to get an on-body camera footage of an officer-involved shooting, where does that all have to go? Who has to check off on that? You have the Freedom of Information Act. You have various state laws about public information. You have your internal policies, who it gets routed to, and what it's done. And it shows that you have a totality of the understanding of what policy. And it's not bad to refer back to and say, well, you know, our pursuit policy says this, or a redaction policy talks about these things. It shows that you know they're there. You know, we don't have printed copies of our policy anymore, but the last time we did, it took up 2 4-inch 3-ring binders. It's just overwhelming. But by showing people that you keep up on it, it lets them know that you have a basis there. And always remember to look for the big picture and know what your resources are within your agency. For example, the missing juvenile. It's a 7-year-old. What are your resources? What does policy say? What does the procedure say? Is this something where there's other community resources that you can get to? Know the who's who out there and mention people by name, that I would contact Mr. Smith at the school district to get school history and do this. Again, it shows that you have a very large global knowledge of what you're trying to accomplish. Timing can be a big concern when you're going through an interview process. You may be given the questions ahead of time to give you the opportunity to do a little bit of study or prep for it, or they may just ask you the questions in place. I talked to a candidate one time, they had been given the questions. It was actually the front and back of a laminated piece of paper, and they never flipped it over to look at the back. And they had 30 minutes for the interview, and they used all 30 minutes on the front side, and it wasn't until one of the members on the board prompted them and said, what about the questions on the back? And the flop sweat started, and they about seized up and vapor locked because there was another third of the interview that was left on the back. So know how much time you have. Generally know how many questions you're going to have. And it doesn't mean that every question is given the same amount of time. There may be some questions that take longer and other questions that are less time. Also kind of know what makes you tick. If there's a visible timer present, don't let it become the big, huge screen in the side of the room that's flashing at you and keeps you off track. Know generally what's out there, and if you've been practicing and you have an idea of what the timing may be, you'll be able to get that. They may give you some visual warnings. They may hold up a card that says you have 5 minutes left or a 1-minute time period. But be aware of that so you're not rushing. Use all of your time. And I know it gets awkward at the end, but I have finished up interviews, and you may have 5, 7, even 10 minutes left. Once you're done answering your last question is not the time that you say thank you and you get up and you walk out of the room. You may have that genuine idea that comes into your head, or from the third question out of 7, you think, oh, wow, I should probably say this. You know, I'd like to get back to the third question and talk about something else that wasn't in my head at the time, but I think really rounds out the question. Again, we go back to the fact that these boards want to see you succeed. They're not going to ding you. Yeah, there may be the comment about, wow, they really pulled that out at the end, but it shows that you're thinking. These are very stressful times, so use that time. Like I said, it's very awkward to be staring at the table with 7 people in suits and ties and dresses across from you, but that's your time. They allotted it to you. Take it and use it.
Yeah, you know, and that's a good point what Dave said. And tell them, I'm finished answering these questions, but if you don't mind, I'm just going to take a minute and reflect on my answers and see if I think of anything else I need to tell you that I've forgotten. And they'll appreciate it. For those of you that have been assessors on boards, you are not going to count somebody down for that. You're going to actually appreciate that they're being thoughtful and really giving it all of that they are. All right, so this is a 3 steps to your answer. So this is a way to answer questions. Now, we've already talked about, I really, from sitting as an assessor on a lot of panels, it is really nice to hear somebody that answers the 3 ways philosophically, what have I done and what am I going to do in the future. That is a really nice kind of answer to hear. And I have seen from assessors that they give the highest ratings to people that typically answer questions that way. The other thing is this 3-step way. This really works well, especially like on a verbal resume. Let's say your question is, why are you the most qualified person? What are your qualifications? Whatever. And you realize, okay, they're wanting me to give them a verbal resume. The first thing, and I just called it soften the ground. This is where you tell them what you're going to tell them. So this is where you say, I'm going to start with so if I were going to give you a verbal resume right now, I would tell you, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start with my formal education, and then I'll talk about some of the training that I've received while being with the police department that's applicable to this position. I'll then talk about some of the positions that I've held, although I probably will not cover all of them. I'll cover the ones that apply to this position. And I'll talk about some of the projects that I've led throughout the years. And then I will talk about some of the intangible things that set me apart from other candidates. And then boom, I'll get started. But I've told you, here's what I'm going to tell you. That's what they're going to expect from me. I'd start out, now, so a C answer on a verbal resume would be for me to just kick right into my verbal resume and say, okay, I have a bachelor's degree in education. I have a master's in administration, both from Northern Arizona University. I have this training, I have that. I've been in this position and that position. That's fine. That's all great. But what people want to know, assessors want to know, why? Why do I care that you were in traffic? Why do I care that you were a motor, Deanna? I can tell them I was a motor. Well, that's all good and fantastic, but why do I care? And so what matters, like when I was testing for, let's say, commander, if I said I was a motor officer for 3 years, and what I learned from being a motor officer that will help me as a commander is I learned how to utilize traffic for crime reduction, to use DDAX. I also learned how to utilize traffic for crowd control, for special events, for traffic, for planning, for this, for that, for this, for that. And so you want to tell them what you did, but more importantly, you have to tell them why it matters that you did what you did. So that'll take your answer from a C answer, which is just an average answer, up to an A+ answer. And then when you're finished with your answer, you put a bow on it. And that is just having a final statement. My final statement, if I were telling you my verbal resume, is something like, it's personal. It's something that they're going to remember me, and other people aren't going to do it. I would say, I've grown up in this police department. Literally, I was 23 years old when I was hired by the Mesa Police Department, and my career path has been planned out so that by the time I reach this point to be a whatever, commander, assistant chief, whatever it is, that I would be well-rounded and that I would have the best understanding of the department as a whole and of the employees and community that we serve. And then I would go into something very personal. I wouldn't sit here before you if I didn't feel that I exceeded the standards set forth to be an assistant chief and lead the men and women of this organization. Or I understand that something like that, something very personal that is going to put a nice, neat bow on my verbal resume that other people aren't going to do. All right, so let's talk about how you say it, because this is really a big deal. People don't care, like we talked about earlier, only 7% of the words that you use people care about. They care more about how you say it. And this starts well before you ever walked in the door. People are going to know you by your brand, so of course you want to work on that brand before you walk in the door. But when you walk in that door, you need to have confidence. Your shoulders need to be back. Your voice has the ability to convey all kinds of emotions. You can give direction, you can inspire, you can motivate, you can do all kinds of things with your voice. And so you need to really watch your voice, your tone, your pitch, your pace, those kinds of things. Besides it activating your stress mechanisms, which makes you breathe faster, which makes your pitch go up, and those kinds of things. If you practice enough and you do maybe a mock with your friends, even though they're your friends, you're still going to get nervous. And so that's why I would recommend definitely doing that. Your posture, when you walk in the room, you need to have square shoulders, a confident stride, which means if you take short, choppy steps, that translates to people that you're not very confident. You square your shoulders, you have your chin up, you have a confident stride, you have a genuine smile, and you convey interest and energy. You lean in, You don't lean out. You don't shrug your shoulders. When you're sitting in that chair, you don't shrug forward. You don't sit forward. You don't lean on the table. But you also don't sit back and widen your stance, and you don't put your arm up over the edge of the chair. You don't do those things. It's a happy middle ground that you should find. Your tone needs to convey some enthusiasm. So just like right now, my tone, my pitch, my pace, it changes depending on what it is I'm talking about. We had a candidate that tested for commander in the last go-around, and he's super monotone. And when he left the room, even though the words he said were, "I'm really excited to be here, and I've really worked hard to put myself in the position." I mean, this is how he talked, and it was terrible. And when he left, even though the words he said were very good, his body language and his tone and pitch and pace and volume turned people off, and the assessors did not rate him very well, and it had nothing to do with the words that he used. So other people that came in that had great delivery and great interpersonal skills, but the words they used were not very good. They didn't answer the questions nearly as well as he did. They did much better. So I would just say really watch this part of it and videotape yourself so that you can see all of your idiosyncrasies.
You know, there's a human factor in all of us, and none of us have had a perfect career. And that's something to acknowledge. If they ask the questions about, tell us a time that you've done, worked with employees to deal with a discipline issue. You know, there was a time when I was a lieutenant that I dealt with something, I didn't do a very good job at it. And it was okay to acknowledge that and say, you know what, I'll tell you about a time. I was a new lieutenant, and I had an employee that was really refusing to work and wouldn't hold to the standards. And I got a little bit over aggressive, and it didn't go so well. But I've learned from that, and this is how I do things in the future. That is an amazing entry into the board to be able to say that I've made mistakes. I have learned from them, and I'm going forward. No one wants to hear the person, the candidate, that says, I know everything, I've done everything right all along, and I have nothing to learn. And people look at that in the transparency, and they appreciate it. And again, you're not competing with anybody else. You are only in competition with yourself. There may be 20 people that are applying for this position, and there's only one position. You're only competing against yourself. You never want to take anybody else down or talk about another candidate. You are just going to talk about yourself and how that runs. Your job, again, is to sell yourself. Articulate in what you've done. And I know that Chief Cantrell talked before about know what your skill sets are, know what you have done. And again, it's not just that I work in this area, I work in this area, I work in this area. But when I worked in the community action team, we were able to integrate with the community members and one of the alcohol rehab centers and the people around there to help each other understand the benefit to the community. We actually had some work groups that came out, and that's important because as a person in this next position, I'll need to know how to work with the community and to support that mission within the organization. So you truly knowing yourself and what you've done with your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and what sets you apart. And that's where you can say, and this is important because, and that's what may set you apart from somebody else. We all have our own image of what we do and how we do it and what our strong points are, but ask other people, hey, if you were going to describe me or my work experience, what are things that you think are important? Because something you think yourself was important or not important may be a different view by somebody else. So find out what other people think about you. But this is also a good point to put out there that don't believe that just because the people on the board know you or know your past work performance, because when we go to a board in our own agency, they may bring in a couple outside raters, but most of the time we know the people on the board. Don't know that they remember what you've done because they can only rate you on what you mentioned that day during the process. They may have worked with you every day for the last 10 years in the same unit, but they can only rate what you said. So make sure you put that whole list out there. Tell a story. People love storytellers. I have a friend in this department that I'll tell a story to just to have him tell it back because he is such a good storyteller, and that's what keeps you in someone's mind. If this is a process that there's 25 people in and there's one selection and they're doing 8 interviews a day for 3 days, you have to set yourself apart somehow, and that's through that storytelling, being genuine. Again, don't assume that they've read that resume. You're selling that resume right now in order to do that. Some of the keys to success is answer the questions that they ask you. Don't be a politician. If it's a hard question and you're not sure the answer, work your way through it, but don't choose to answer something else because you don't want to answer that question. That will turn people off. If you're standing, move around. Use those hand gestures. Become personal. Don't look like a robot. Don't sound like a robot, and don't look like a robot. Once you've said your statement, after clear, concise, complete, and correct, move on. Don't belabor the point. They have time that they need to get to, and your time is probably also short. If you can work them through in a logical area, we talk about chronologically, if you can work your way through that, people follow that. If you bounce around and when I was a sergeant this happened, I was an officer this happened, when I was a lieutenant this happened, back to a sergeant, they're not going to follow that. They need to be given it to them in that story method. Rehearse those questions, and we've had it in almost every slide, but you cannot practice or over-practice enough to get this done. And again, like Deanna said before, it's putting that bow on it. And all of these things together, the totality of these circumstances are what make me the best candidate to be the record shift supervisor, the administrator in communications, the lieutenant over gangs, whatever it is, but you're packaging that together to leave them. It's kind of like a closing argument with a prosecutor to leave the last word in the jury's mind to be able to let them know that I'm done and this is what you have to find. You're not giving the panel any other option but to choose you for that position.
All right, and so at the end of an interview, you may be asked, is there anything else you'd like to add, or do you have any questions for the board? You do always want to have something to add, and that's, you don't always have to have questions, which I think is probably the next slide, but you do want to add whatever you haven't had a chance to get out. If you didn't get to talk, if you didn't get to do a verbal resume, let's say you gave them your resume, and so they didn't ask you that question. You want to talk about why why are you the most important? So I would take my closing statement from my verbal resume there about me growing up in this police department, why this police department, the city of Mesa, the people that live here. I have kids that I raised in the city. They've gone to school in Mesa. I have connections in the community. I've coached in the community, whatever. You want that time to tie you to the position that you're applying for and tell them why you are the best fit, why you are the most importantly, why you are the best fit for that position. And on timing, make that about 2 minutes. On your verbal resume, your verbal resume should be about 5 minutes or less. Sometimes it's hard to squeeze it all into that. And I know, just as a side point, when I was giving my verbal resume at my assistant chief process, I could not hardly get it under 8 minutes, and I was flying. And so at the beginning I told them, I said, I'm going to talk really fast because I know I only have 30 minutes for 6 questions, and I really want to get all of this information to you, so I'm going to be talking pretty fast for this this first question. And then I went through my verbal resume, but I warned them ahead of time that I'd be talking fast, and they appreciated that. Go ahead. Oh, okay, sorry. I thought Dave was doing the slide, but it's me. So as far as questions go, so anything you want to add? Yes, I want to tell you about why I'm the best person for this position. And do you have any questions for the board? Like I said, you don't have to have questions, but if you do have any questions, here's a few examples of what you might say. Well, if you had any advice for me as the next sergeant over the narcotics unit, what would that advice be? Or what are the qualifications you're looking for in the person that takes this job? Something like that. So, or maybe something as simple as, do you have any idea of when you're going to be making the decision on who you're going to promote or who you're going to choose for this position? Something like that. But you certainly don't have to ask questions. The board doesn't expect that of you.
So we're going to start to summarize yesterday and today and moving forward, but some of the common errors, and both Chief Cantrell and I have been on boards, and some of you have, and you know when somebody walks out and you think, wow, they knew it, they just didn't tell us. Skipping over important information because you knew the oral board members and you knew that they knew what you had. Again, they can only rate you on what happened that day. Just giving a basic answer and not giving some details. people say the devil's in the details, and it shows the board that you're a better candidate than somebody else because of the totality of what you're thinking about. Another key is answering the question from the position that you're applying for. And a technique that somebody told me when I was an officer testing for the rank as sergeant, they said, remember, you're a sergeant. You're answering these questions as a supervisor. So they suggested in my pockets, in my pants pockets, take sergeant chevrons and put them in there. So tactile, you can feel those and think, yeah, I have to answer these as a sergeant. If you're going for a lieutenant, same type of thing. Put lieutenant bars in your pocket. Whatever it is, to help you remember that that's the position that you're applying for. So therefore, those are the answers that you need to be giving. Failing to prep. If you don't prepare and know what you're going to talk about, you're not going to do well. And again, this starts now. It starts today. When you're done with the webinar, start thinking about how you want to put your notebook together. Think about the resources you want to get in. Whether the test is actually going to be next month or next year, start doing the research and getting together. Also, answer the entire question. Sometimes there's two-part questions that come out. It's okay, and we talked about it, it's okay to ask for that question to be repeated or make sure you have everything. Or if the question's in front of you, pause and say, I'm just going to reread the question to make sure that I have everything here. Again, ask them to be repeated. Everything that they have is, they understand you're stressed. Ask it to be repeated, and they can come in to have it taken care of. Oops. Don't ask the weird questions at the end. Deanna talked about asking the questions. It's okay to say, what would you expect of the next person, or what are the biggest challenges of the next person?
But there was a commander that actually asked the chief of police, how would you have answered that question about such and such? And everyone on the board was just, our jaws just hit the table, and the chief said, I'm not answering the question. I'm not the one that's applying for the position. And so, you know, it was a bad question, and it did go against him whenever it came to rating our final ratings. So,
don't use buzzwords. I came and took over IT, and one of the buzzwords in IT is a solution. Everybody has a solution for this, and our solution, I've actually banned the word. We can't use it in here anymore because I hate buzzwords. If you want to drill down into the solution and interface with the community, people are going to look at those words and think that you're just kind of shining them on. So use concrete examples and not just buzzwords. Forgetting to talk about your outside experience, other agencies, where you have networked and integrated. And again, Chief Cantrell talked about what have you done in the community, and those are important because the agency and the organization is investing in you, and they want to see you continue to be there. They want to see that you're part of the community and you're not going to go out somewhere else. And again, that general lack of preparedness, if you're not prepared, you're not going to be able to get through this, and it's going to become very obvious very quickly. And we've all been in those situations where you've walked in the room, maybe it's just a meeting, and you realize, I am not ready for this, and you wish you could just walk out. So some final thoughts. Come up with some words that describe you, 4 or 5 words, and inject those into your answers. But if you say that you're energetic, you don't want to sit there slumped to the side and act like Eeyore and say that you're energetic. This is all part of your brand. You're leaving them with a view of, hey, at the end of 25 candidates and they sit down, you remember that candidate that coached Little League and they worked 7 different areas in their career and they had the master's degree and they talked about the paper that they wrote and the time that they had 2 employees that were fighting and they really settled it and they did it in a really unique way. You're trying to come up with this uniqueness that separates you from other people. Again, it's so that they only have one solution, and that's to hire you for that position. Follow up, and this is where I'm planning for failure. Immediately after every step in the process, go out to your car, your office, wherever it is, and write down everything that you can remember. And it's not that you're planning to fail, you're just being prepared, and maybe it's going to help somebody else out in the process in the future. Ask for positive and negative feedback from members of the board, even if you did well. This is going to help you for the next time. And if you bombed it, don't be embarrassed. Go out and ask for that help. You know, after the first time I tested for sergeant, I made the list. I didn't do very well on the list. I think I was 22 out of 25 people, and there was about 50 people that tested. There was not a chance they were going to get down to me. And I went to one of the raters, who was actually a mentor of mine, and I said, what did I do wrong? And they said, you know what, you didn't answer like Dave. You answered like you thought we wanted to hear, but you weren't you at all. And it was a tough thing to hear. And sometimes getting bad news is hard to hear, but you have to get that in order to do better. We walked out of a meeting earlier this week, and we're walking down the stairs and talked about someone else who was in the meeting who just was the odd person who was out there. They were doing their own thing, and we said, you know what? They just don't have any self-realization of how they come across in meetings. And if you don't go and ask somebody, you may never get that. If it's appropriate, send that handwritten thank you to the board members. Depending on the situation, it may or may not be appropriate. You kind of have to look into your culture, that organization, and see how they do things. But that can leave that lasting impression. If they're not making a decision that day and there's multiple people, maybe this is a position that's open and it's open until they find the right candidate, that to the board member may be something that puts you back to the top of the list if they meet in 2 or 3 weeks to put you back up there. So I think we just want to make sure that you have everything possible in order to accomplish that.
And this is the last slide, and then we'll answer some questions. And this is, you know, success is not permanent, failure is not fatal. I had to take the sergeant's test. I took it 3 times before I got promoted. I made the list the first 2 times, but it wasn't until the 3rd that I finally got promoted. And it was fortunate for me that that happened, because I think I ended up being a much better sergeant by waiting those few years from when I first tested to when I actually got promoted. I ended up being a much better, well-rounded police officer as well, because I got an opportunity to go be undercover for a couple of years. And so, you know, sometimes doors are going to close in your face, and you think they should be open, and you think I should get that position, and I should be promoted, and why am I not getting it? But, you know, try not to look at it like that, that there's a plan for you, and sometimes maybe what you think your timing should be is not what it should be. And so when you don't succeed, maybe you'll find later on, several years later, it actually did help you be more successful. So this, I'm sure you can all figure out who this is, but take a look at that. Take a look at all of those defeated, rejected, lost, you know, over and over and over, and never quit plugging away, and ended up becoming one of our greatest presidents. And so we'll just end it with that just because you become successful doesn't mean you stop learning. You constantly need to keep updated. You need to read about current events and current things that are happening throughout the country so that you can stay relevant. You have to keep yourself relevant no matter how high up you end up in your organization. And when you do fail, maybe you'll find that it's one of the best things for you. So we'll answer a few questions here, Heather, if you have some.
Great, great. Yeah, absolutely. Again, a very excellent presentation today. Thank you, Commander Hagar, and thank you, Chief Cantrell. We do have a number of questions, and we'll take some time to address as many as possible. If for some reason we don't get to your question, please follow up with us afterwards, and we'd be happy to put you in touch with the instructors for offline conversations. The first question that we have is regarding handouts and visual aids. Is it appropriate to bring in handouts or visual aids like a PowerPoint or, you know, a piece of paper with information on it and pass it out to the oral board?
I would say most of the time no, unless it is one of those that they've given you something that you have to bring back with you and maybe present on. I know sometimes we have processes where we've been given a project, we had to work on the project for about a week, and then we had to bring that project in with us, and we did a mock community presentation or something of that nature. But typically, no. If you bring in a resume with you, at least in Mesa and in the processes I've been at in other agencies or other states, that would not be something that would be appropriate.
The board really wants to see your thought process and your interpersonal skills. If they wanted you to submit something that was a written document or a project, they're going to ask for that separately. And I actually sat on a board where a person came in and handed out their resume to the members of the panel and then proceeded to read the resume word for word, not adding the, and this is important, why, or this sets me apart from, but read what they had just handed to us. And we looked at each other a little bit bewildered as to why that took place. So I agree. In general, I don't think it's appropriate for handouts or visual aids.
Great. Thank you so much for that guidance. Along those lines, is it appropriate for a candidate to bring in their own notes so that way, if they get flustered or, just to reference back to?
I would say again, if you're given the questions ahead of time and you're given prep time, maybe 30 minutes to write down your general thoughts, then absolutely, that's what it's for. Bring in that paper, maybe you've outlined your thoughts, and typically the board will keep that documentation at the end, and we will look at your notes and see what your thought process was and see if you did have some things on those notes that maybe you didn't get to. But otherwise, no, I would say it's not really. Part of your job is in interviewing is to be prepared, is to have all of that information inside of you in your own brain, in your own mind, and be ready and able to regurgitate that information depending on what kind of question is asked of you without any notes.
Excellent points. The next question we have is whether or not it's appropriate to find out in advance who's going to be on the oral board, and if so, how do you find that information out typically?
Absolutely, it's appropriate. In fact, I think you're remiss if you don't do it. I know in our agency, we actually put the information out there to say these are the panelists on the board, so that way you don't go and ask those people for help. It kind of sets them aside. But if you know the human resources specialist that has that, you can say, oh, by the way, who would I expect to see on the panel? Find out by any means you can, because again, that's where those questions will be generated from. And for our executive level panels here, we'll have the chief of police, a fire chief, a deputy city manager. We'll also have people from the community, the Chamber of Commerce president, the president of the Hispanic Citizens Association. So you're trying to gear your answers towards the board, so absolutely reach out and find out who those people are. It's going to make you that much more successful.
Great, thank you for that. The next question we have is about the candidate's exit strategy, and that is, at the end of the interview, what is the best way to leave? Is it best to thank the panel for their time and shake each person's hand, or what do you recommend?
Absolutely. I would say if you're allowed to shake hands before the interview, I would recommend that, because they're going to make judgments about you when you walk in the room. And so if it's allowed, take the minute beforehand, walk around the room, give a good firm handshake. Don't have a limp hand when you handshake. Don't squeeze your hand off, but have a nice firm handshake. Your handshake needs to be straight up and down. Don't turn your palm to where your palm is down and your top of your hand is up. That shows power and authority. And so you want to be careful of what kind of handshake you give, and you want to have a genuine smile. Plus it helps you get your voice out into the room, which makes you less nervous. Hi, it's so nice to meet you. And maybe you even give an extra touch with your other hand on their shoulder or something like that, because it's very personable. And so if you have an opportunity beforehand, I would always do it before. Because it's going to help them have a better opinion of you before you ever start answering questions, and maybe they'll give you some leeway because they like you. But if you didn't have a chance before, then absolutely at the end you should take the time to walk around the room and say thanks for taking the time out of your day. I appreciate it. I know you got a lot of candidates. It's going to be a long day, or whatever. You say something, but absolutely.
Excellent advice. The next question is about, what do you do as a candidate if the day of the big day, you're under the weather, like genuinely ill? How do you approach that? Do you go into the interview and convey that, or what's the best advice you guys have?
I actually had this. I had a surgery the day before. It was a little outpatient surgery the day before an interview for, I believe it was sergeant. And there's usually a human resources analyst representative that kind of walks you through the process. And I had explained to that individual that really with the surgery that I had, I was either going to be able to sit down or stand up, but I wasn't going to be able to sit down and stand up and transition through a lot of stuff during the interview process. And she said, that's great, I'll announce it to the board with you in there just so it's not a secret, and let them know that's the situation. Or if you are feeling under the weather, let them know, so that so they know, so you're not trying to cover something up, or they're not wondering, wow, they seem really disinterested or disassociated. It lets them know that they are feeling sick. The tissue in hand and the red nose may help, but be upfront and open about it. And more than likely there'll be somebody on that board, if it's an internal type of situation, that says, you know what, they are usually really bubbly and excited, and this is different, so obviously they're feeling under the weather, and it just helps bring that along. But be upfront about it.
Yeah, and if you can reschedule it, I would. And once in a while you can get rescheduled for later on, because interviews typically are longer than 1 day. But if you can't and you got to go in sick, you know, let them know that you are.
Great, thank you for that advice. The next question we have is, when you answer a resume question, if you have career ambitions to eventually reach a level higher than the one you are testing for, do you make this known, or do you focus only on the position you are testing for, rather than implying that this is a kind of a stepping stone?
I think you have to, it depends on the audience. I think you have to acknowledge that it's there, but you don't want to be in a situation where you're discounting the position you're already going to. And you can say something about, you know, in the future, several years down the road, I would like to attain this. I would like to be an assistant chief, but right now as a commander, I want to experience as much as there is possible so that I understand this in the organization. You're tossing it out there as somewhat of a teaser, but it doesn't look like that is your only goal, and this is just an impediment to get there. So you have to read your audience and know what it's for and say it in just the right amount of emphasis. Otherwise, it could be taken bad. But if you walk in and say, well, you know, this is just a year or two until I make assistant chief over this area, that's going to be taken pretty poor.
Yeah, that's great advice. I was kind of giggling there in the background just because I totally understood what you were saying. The next question we have, and it's our final question for the day, is what advice or what recommendations do you have for individuals who are trying to prepare for a position or interview within another agency?
You know, I would, depending on what the position is, you know, because I reaching the level that I'm at, I've certainly started looking at other agencies for chief positions. And one, I would do all of your research about that city, depending on what position you're testing for, of course. But do all of the research you can, and you'll find a lot of it online as far as the city, economic growth, budgets, all that kind of information is public record online. But secondly, I would get to know key people in the organization. If you have one friend and they can say, hey, you might want to talk to so-and-so, and then you talk to that person and they'll turn you on to another person. And so so that you can start making those connections over there and talking to folks about that organization and maybe the culture of that organization before you ever test for it. So if you at least have one friend, then I would start making some other connections through that one person. But yeah, I think it's completely appropriate.
Because quite honestly, as a board member who has been, I've gone to other agencies to sit on their assessment panels, when you find out that someone from an outside agency has done that amount of research, you actually think favorably about them, because it shows that they were prepared more than just filling out a resume and an application and showing up. And I've even had them say, you know, after I saw this position online, I talked to, and they'll list 2 or 3 people within the organization to find out if I would be a good fit. And after speaking to them, I think that my background and my education, the goals of your agency, merge very well together, and I would be a good fit. That's an amazing answer to somebody, and it lets them know that you went the extra mile to get that done. So I agree 100% that you reach out to that agency and people there and do that research.
Again, great points. Thank you so much. With that said, this actually wraps up our webinar for today. Chief, Commander, do you have any closing remarks for our audience listening in?
You know, I think that our environment and law enforcement, and this is a little bit more for the sworn folks, we're in competition from day one. When I tested for the police department, there were 1,600 people that tested for 42 spots. During the academy, you're even competitive, because based on your academic performance in the academy is what set our seniority list. There's only been about 12 weeks out of my entire career that you haven't been in somewhat of competition, and that's during field training, because everybody that graduates field training, they get a job. But as soon as you're on your own, you're setting that brand, you're setting that standard to move forward, whether it's to be a specialized, a field training officer, a detective, or for the promotional track. So we're competing all the way along. But I think what we have to remember is even though we're in competition, if I can help somebody out up here and help them promote, maybe even over me, it makes our organizations better. So yeah, knowledge is power, but sharing that knowledge is even more powerful. So don't hold this information close to your chest. Prepare, help everybody else around you, because the end goal, we're in service to our community. We're not in service to ourselves. We're trying to make this field better and more well received within the nation. So help everybody else around you, and you can get promoted, you can get whatever you need to be done, but just prepare and practice.
And then I would just echo part of what Dave said. I was going to say, become a mentor and be a mentor, because I've learned more probably from that, from mentoring other people and helping them try to get into positions that they're trying to get into, has helped me learn more about the organization, more about our resources, more about tuition reimbursement and colleges and classes and what the city offers, because I've had to do that research to help other people. And so I would say that as well. Be a mentor, and as the more you help other people, the more you're going to help yourself.
Great advice. Well, thank you so much to the Mesa, Arizona Police Department, Chief Cantrell and Commander Hagar, for spending these last couple days with the Justice Clearinghouse on this webinar series. To all the attendees, thank you so much for participating and your active participation in this webinar. If you have any questions for us, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to put you in touch with today's instructors. And with that said, this concludes our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks.